Refresh recording for the meet with the trainer going over the deadlift. If you were in that Zoom meeting, I just want to preface this with apologizing. We had some technical errors. I was in it, and apparently everyone else was in it, but it wasn't the same one somehow. So again, I apologize for that. But let's get started with this. This is for everyone who was in that Zoom meeting. So for the deadlift, elusive or misunderstood. With deadlifting, basically what I've seen in the past is that people either know how to do it but aren't sure they're doing the correct form, or they're very nervous with like injuring themselves for the back, or they've only known to do it with a barbell and don't think they're strong enough to do it. So what this presentation is going to go over is what deadlifting works, and then every single variation that I know of and examples of the variations, and trying to figure out what is the right one for you. So what is the deadlift and what does it work? So the deadlift falls into a hip dominant category. So what it is basically a hip hinge. If we think about a hip hinge, it's basically the motion that we take when we see someone take a bow. So it is extending and it is bending at the hips, pushing the hips backwards, and then engaging the glutes, hamstrings, and our erector, which is our back, to basically engage at that point. So that's what it actively works, is our glute max, which is our butt, our hamstrings, which is the back of our thigh, and our back, which is our erector spinae, which you can see all three of those in the pictures. The glute medius is the first picture, the hamstrings is the second picture, and our erector spinae is the third picture, just to kind of give you guys a visual of the muscles that we work and where they connect. What we passively work is our abdominals, which is our rectus abdominis, and our obliques. So this is going to depend on the variation. Like if we do anything with a straight bar, it's going to be more rectus abdominis, which is the middle of our abs. So like when we see someone like with ab definition, that's what we're seeing, is that rectus abdominis. And our obliques is more of the side. So like what we see like below the rib cage. So we're going to see more of the obliques when it's like a single leg variation or an offset variation of it. So there's many different variations. The reasons that these variations you would use is for if you have range of motion limitations. So if you don't have the hip motion, say to get down to the ground for a conventional straight bar deadlift, there's a different variation that would probably be better. Sometimes injuries, if you hurt a single leg, you might have to go and only do single leg variations on the leg that isn't injured. Injury prevention, like single legs work, is really good at preventing knee, hip, and ankle injuries because you have to stabilize when you do it and strengthen it up. Or like specifically working like glute max or hamstring work, especially if you're a sprinter or an athlete, or if you still play sports where it involves changing direction or running around. Strengthening up the hamstring specifically can help prevent any strains that you get. Also the accessibility, because right now during COVID, you might not have a straight bar. You might only have a 15-pound dumbbell. So you'd have to find a variation that would work to challenge you with that 15-pound dumbbell. And that's also adaptation. Like when we talk about adaptation, we talk about really not doing the same thing all the time. So we want to keep doing the same exercise long enough to the point where we hit a plateau. And we've all done that. We've all hit that wall where it's just like you just get either you've done an exercise for like 6 to 8 months and you're just sick of the exercise, or that you've done as much as you can with that exercise and you just can't go heavier, or you feel like you're actually losing ground and having to go lighter each week. So changing the exercise very slightly to a different variation can actually push you past that plateau and strengthen up those muscles more. And then we are also talked about target specific work. So common deadlift exercises. So these are the ones that you're going to see most often in the gym or people talk about online. So the first one is conventional straight bar deadlift. So this is the normal position that you see for people. Feet are within feet are within shoulder width. Hands are outside the legs in a nice position. And then as you can see in the first picture, that is the starting position. And then standing up, squeezing the glutes, driving through the floor, and then ending up in a nice tall position. So limiting factors with this would be someone's hip range of motion, because as you can see in the first picture, you do have to get pretty low in order to do that and have your hips in that good position, which a lot of people tend to get really high for it. And then also your back and your ab strength with it too, because from this position, as you can see, the person in the picture is very close to parallel with the ground. So when you're pulling up, all that muscle in your core of your body has to contract and stay tight as you get to that standing position, especially because that weight is in front of you. So it's even tougher to do. So that could also be a limiting factor when you're doing this. So next is sumo deadlifting. So I'm actually going to let play these videos for you. The first video is actually Tony Gentilcore. If you don't know who Tony Gentilcore is, he's my go-to person for deadlifting. So if you look anything up by him, he's got a blog website, T-Nation, anything like that. The guy can sumo deadlift 600 pounds and is just an incredibly knowledgeable person, has been in the industry for more than 20 years. He's my go-to person for anything deadlift related. So the first video, I'm just going to let him explain his setup for the sumo deadlift and why to do it. It's a short video, so I'm just going to play it right now.
Hey everyone, welcome back to day 18 of deadlifts, and today I want to talk about stance with the sumo deadlift. So as a brief reminder, with conventional deadlift, we're going to have the barbell over midfoot, we're going to have a narrower stance, we're going to allow for a little bit of tibial translation to get to the bar. With a sumo deadlift, the width is going to be dictated or predicated by someone's anatomy and their access to abduction. So some people are going to be able to go really wide. I find that for a lot of people, it eats their hips up, so I prefer a little bit more of a modified stance. And here what we have to do is be careful of when we go down, we don't want the knees inside the feet. So we have to be really aggressive of pushing the knees out. So I tell people to get right up against the bar and melt to the bar, get those knees out, hands inside the knees, and we're ready to rock and roll.
So I think that's a better explanation than I could ever give for a sumo deadlift. He's got 10 years on me for deadlifting, and I think the heaviest I've ever gone with a deadlift is 500 pounds. So he's definitely got me on that with a 600-pound deadlift. And then just to show him doing it is going to be the next video. So just an example of someone doing it in movement. So the same setup he was talking about, and just like that. So again, the same limitations from the conventional is just going to be your core strength with this. This is going to be a lot more hip friendly. So if you really want to still do a straight bar or only have access to a straight bar and you're having trouble getting low because of hip range of motion, this is a good variation because it raises up how far you need to go. So now you don't have to go as low for it. So the next is the trap bar or the hex bar. You've probably seen this at a YMCA. It started off as a shrug bar, and people have modified it. People joke around that it's called the American deadlift at this point. But this is going to get your hips in an even higher up position than the sumo deadlift. Obviously, the limitations of this is going to be if you have a hex bar. So I'm just going to play the video real quick so you guys can see. So as you guys can see in the video, the hips are in a much higher position than they were for the sumo or the conventional, and my feet are within my hand. My hands are outside my legs. Sorry. So what this does is also puts you in your grip in a very neutral grip position. So if you're having issues with shoulders with it being out front and having to do a double overhand or an over underhand grip with conventional sumo, this puts it in a much more neutral position, so you're not limited by any kind of like shoulder mobility issues that you might be doing, and it's a lot easier on the on your core strength too. It doesn't require as much. It still requires a good amount of strength, but you're less likely to get hurt doing this. This is one of my favorite variations of it. I was an avid straight bar lifter for about 10 years, and as soon as I learned of the hex bar and what it is and what you can do with it and how much safer it was, I was hooked. I haven't touched a straight bar and done a straight bar deadlift probably in, I think 2015 was the last time I did one. 2016. And then ever since I got on the hex bar at 2016, I haven't gone back. So the next one you might see is a Romanian deadlift, or better known as an RDL. So there's many different variations of it. The first two variations are probably ones that you have seen before. So with a barbell and a dumbbell. So essentially, this is the top end of the deadlift. So it requires a little bit more core strength than the hex bar, but this is primarily used to work on your lockout, essentially. So like when you're trying to get to the top position because you start at the top and go down, but it can also be an easier way to get into deadlifting because you don't have to go to the ground. So you're not limited again by your range of motion. So for this, what you want to think is slight bend in the knee and really just focus on pulling your shoulder blades into your armpits and trying to bend the bar or bend the dumbbell, and then just pushing your hips back and just really bracing your core, because a lot of times when you push that hip back, you'll still try to arch a little bit, and you really just want to focus on bending over and taking that bow while keeping your core tight. So this is going to be an example of the barbell, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. So shoulders are tight, hips back, and squeeze. And again, you don't have to be as explosive as the person in the video. I've been deadlifting since I was probably 10 years old. This is myself in the video. So my hip hinging ability is really good. I've done 500 pounds. I've done over 400 pounds in almost every variation that involves a barbell or something you can load up with weight plates. So I have a lot of experience in the hip hinging. I'm very explosive. It's just in my nature, in my genetics, as my body type. So it doesn't have to be that fast and aggressive. It can be slower, but you still want to have that tight lockout at the top. So what I'm going to show next is the dumbbell variation. And again, looks very, very similar, right? Same motion, and actually I'm getting a little bit more range of motion because I'm not limited by my shoulder range of motion, or how do I want to say this? My shoulder range of motion is a lot more free because I'm not locked into a bar with both hands. So you might get a little bit more range of motion out of it, actually. So to continue with the Romanian deadlifts, these are a little bit less common. So these are single leg Romanian deadlifts. So all the cueing is the same, except your one leg is going to go back. And you really need to focus on when you push that leg back is to have your toe point towards the ground the whole time so your hip doesn't turn out and you don't get any torque and tension in your lumbar. So if you were here for the core presentation last week, you know like what that does to your spine and why it's not good. And then what you really want to do is reach back as far as you can with that foot. Like try to kick the wall behind you with that foot. Even if the wall is 20 feet back, you want to just picture a wall right behind you. You're just trying to kick it. Because what that's going to do is it's going to engage your hamstring and your glutes more. And that's really what's going to help stabilize you so you don't fall over. And also you want to make sure that you have the dumbbell in the opposite hand that you're going to be, or in the opposite hand of the leg you're going to be standing on. So if you're going to be standing just on your right leg and your left leg is going to go back and out, you want to hold the dumbbell in your left leg. So I'm going to play both of them for you. So this is where you would start with a single dumbbell. And you really want to think when you're standing up, drive through the ground with your foot. Just flat through the ground with your foot as you stand up. You don't want to think swing the leg back because then you're going to start arching. And then another cue I would use is in the video, I'm looking down. I definitely encourage people to like look in a mirror and try to look at yourself. Like just picture like you had like Under Armour symbol or Superman symbol on your chest and you're trying to see that symbol the whole entire time you're doing it. It's not going to make you arch up when you deadlift. And something I forgot to talk about with the other deadlifts, you really don't want to look up when you're doing like a conventional or a sumo or a hex bar. Like it's an old school method because people ended up rounding their backs a lot. So they're like, oh, look up towards the ceiling. And when you're in that hyper extension of your neck, yeah, your back is flat. But what they're starting to realize now is as you're getting to tougher and tougher weights and more exertion, you're actually pinching your carotid arteries in your neck and you can pass out from it. Because if you've seen Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or mixed martial arts, when someone gets someone in a rear naked choke, like that choke where they go around their neck, the reason they go out is not because they're cutting off the airflow, it's because they're pinching the carotid artery and stopping blood flow to the brain. So the same thing basically happens when you do it to yourself if you start looking up towards the ceiling while you're doing an exercise. The reason it doesn't happen with a Romanian deadlift is because when you're doing it, you're going down, so you're basically in that down position and you're not really exerting yourself too much, especially on a single leg variation of it. and it actually keeps you more balanced because you're picking that point in front of you. So the second variation is the progression to this, which is using 2 dumbbells, which is actually significantly tougher than the double leg or the single dumbbell. I know a lot of people would think normally it'd be easier, but it actually is significantly tougher. So hip thruster. So with the hip thruster has become extremely popular in the last 2 years. This is Brett Contreras. He is the glute guy. He literally has PhD studies in glute and glute development, and he's the one that has popularized the hip thruster that you now see probably almost every single gym has someone doing a hip thruster somewhere in some variation and form. So with this, you always want to use a pad or like get a towel or like make sure you have a sweatshirt on or something because the bar will dig into your hips. And what you're going to do is you're going to start, as you can see on the skeleton, your shoulder blades, that bump in the middle of your shoulder blades is going to start on the top of the bench. And then you're going to sit down, you're going to have the hips, you're going to bring the bar onto like where the dent in your hip bone is, and you're going to hold on to both sides of the bar so the bar doesn't move when you go up. And then all you're going to do is plant your feet. You're going to drive into the ground with your feet and squeeze your butt as hard as you can until you get to a point where your glutes won't contract anymore. So notice how I say glutes won't contract. We're not trying to extend the hips and overextend and then start getting into that lumbar extension that we talked about last week, which is really bad, especially loaded up. So as you can see, you'll watch Brett Contreras do this, and he'll do exactly what I just said for the setup, and it's just a nice squeeze. So notice how he's not even getting to full parallel where he's at. So he has his own bench that he made. You can easily do this with one of the benches at any gym or the YMCA, or even I've seen people do it with their couch actually in like home videos and stuff like that. So a couch wouldn't be a bad idea. You just want to make sure you have it pinned up against something that's not going to move, because otherwise you can slip and fall and hurt yourself, or you can even flip over a bench. I've seen a couple times that happen before. So next one, we're going to go into less common deadlift exercises. Sorry, I had to get a drink of water. So less common deadlift exercises, these are the things that you haven't really seen before. So the first one we're going to go into is a rack pull. So a rack pull is, again, another way to work on your lockout for a conventional sumo or like basically your deadlift in general, your hip hinge. So the RDL starts at the top. So basically the difference between the Romanian deadlift and this is that in the rack pull, in a Romanian deadlift, you're doing the negative motion first. So you're getting a stretch reflex from your hamstrings and your glutes and then engaging. This rack pull, you're starting from a static position. It is a dead stop. So this is almost the same as when you're doing a conventional deadlift from the floor. It's just, again, much, much higher up. So if a range of motion is an issue, this is a good variation to do. So for the setup for this, you want to set it up so it's either at or above your knees. So I usually start in the middle of my kneecap. Some people say start below. I prefer the middle of the kneecap or even above, because I'm just getting it enough where it's like I can get underneath the bar and get my hip hinge, and then all I'm going to do is squeeze and pull. I like it on the J hooks specifically because it gives you that feedback when you put it down, because you basically want to keep it right at knee or above the knee and then just squeeze and go to a stand-up position and then let it almost skim your thighs as you go down, and you want to end up in the middle of the J hook. If you're ending up forward or backwards of the J hook, that means your footing position's off. So if you're too far forward, you're going to hit the front of the J hooks every time instead of hitting the middle when you put it back down. And same thing when you go backwards. You can definitely do this off of safety bars or any other hooks, but just be cognizant of like where it hits every single time. And then all you really need to think about with this is just driving your feet, and then just it's a squeeze glute contraction as you do it. And then it's just a grip and rip, essentially, as you'll see in the video. And I'll just maximize it. See how it's close every single time? So what you really want to focus on is taking your time, putting it down. So I would use less weight with this, because especially if you use with a safety bar, you can bounce it. off a safety bar, and it's going to have some whip and you're going to have some momentum. So especially when it's that high, if you're doing fast reps, you're not getting the full benefit out of doing it. You're using momentum and you're kind of cheating the rep a little bit. So the next one is a single leg deadlift. I've also seen these called skater squats. If you're familiar with Mike Boyle, which I mentioned in the other presentation, or MBSC, they do these a lot and they got away from it and now it's coming back. But they're really calling them single leg deadlifts. So again, this is for someone that, like, if you only have sandbags at home, or like light weights or light dumbbells, or if you only have like backpacks that you're using, this is a really good variation. So the big thing with this is that you really want to take your time and really put a lot of emphasis in that front leg. Like, just think of a nail going through the middle of your foot, and that's where you want to focus all your weight on as you do it. But you're still going to do the same thing you do in every other normal setup for it, which is drive through the ground at the bottom, squeeze your glute at the top, and I would even squeeze the glutes at the bottom too. But it's going to be taking your time on the way down and then driving and exploding through the ground on the way up. So as you can see, so since I'm using weight plates in this, I'm reaching significantly further forward than you really should. Like, if you're shoulder loading it, you really should be in a more upright position than what I was showing right there. And it should look almost like a trap bar deadlift at that point. If you go back to the trap bar deadlift video or find a video of trap bar deadlift, it should look in that almost 45-degree, 50-degree angle. And then stand going down, or at the bottom position, it should look like that. And then at the top should go up. I would even recommend a pad behind you for your knee to touch, just so you know it's like, hey, I'm there, and now I can go up. This I would definitely say is a more advanced variation than anything else. So you might even have to like hold on to something for support if you choose to try this. But I would say this is a more advanced variation. I would definitely do a single leg Romanian deadlift before I would have anyone do a single leg deadlift. So the next is a reverse lunge. So a lot of people wouldn't think of this as a hip hinge variation. I like this as a hip hinge variation because if you do it properly, you are engaging the same muscles. You're engaging your hamstring, your glutes, your abdominals, and your back when you're doing this, but it's all how you set it up. So in a forward lunge, you're really putting all that emphasis in that front leg and then driving through the front leg. So that's why you're working the quad. When you're stepping back with the reverse lunge, you have the option now of putting more emphasis in that leg when you're stepping back and trying to get your shin in a more parallel position. You'll see in the video, I have my knee a little bit more forward and a little bit more of a positive shin angle than parallel, or perpendicular to ground, sorry. You want to try to go for a more perpendicular, but when you do it, same cues as everything else with the single leg, because this is technically a single leg variation, and this is probably where I would start someone even before a single leg Romanian deadlift, to drive through the ground at the bottom and squeeze on the way up. Take your time on the way down. So you'll see right here, and I'm squeezing. I'm not trying to drive through with my quad. There is some passive quad, but I'm squeezing every time, and you're seeing that in my lockout. The lockout looks very similar to everything else that I'm doing. So really, when you're doing that, you want to try to load up those hamstrings. So take a step back, not so far that you can't be balanced, but make sure when you're stepping back, like, and you're going down, you're feeling that hamstring stretch out a little bit in your front leg, and then drive and squeeze, and really focus on that drive and squeeze. And if you do that, you'll get more hamstring and glute engagement out of it than you would for quadricep, like you would for a forward lunge. So these are some of my favorite variations to start off with. If you don't have any weights available to you, if you are just starting off and you're not sure about hip hinging or deadlifting or anything like that, or you haven't done anything in the past and you're worried about doing it on your own, these are glute bridges. So all this is just laying on your back and squeezing your glutes as hard as you can and lifting your hips to a point where they naturally stop, and then just holding that position for time. So the way I would do this is I would start again, if you were here for the presentation last week, same style of like, okay, start at 10 seconds week 1, 15 week 2, and so on and so forth till you build up to 30 seconds. Even and then I would switch to a single leg glute bridge at that point. So I'll show you both variations. They're super easy, super simple. As you can see, I'm just holding my hips, squeezing my glutes as hard as I can, and it's just like that. It's something super easy that you can do anywhere. This is usually what I give clients that I've trained that travel and want to do something light and quick on their travel. I'll tell them, like, hey, as soon as you get there, whether it's a long car ride or a long flight, go to your hotel room, get in, do some glute bridges, do some hip lifts, which we'll get to next. And then here is the single leg variation. So right there, and just holding for time. And then you switch. Nothing really to it. So now we're going to the hip lift. So this is what I would opposite the hip bridge day with. So hip bridge is holding, just like a bridge holds up. A hip lift is movement. So now this one is going to be for reps. So this would follow our normal rep scheme of like 3x8, 3x10, 3x12, or whatever rep scheme you're doing for that. But again, this is super easy to do, and you can really do it anywhere. All it is just movement for it. So the 2-leg variation, I'm still just squeezing and driving through the feet, which is like the main cue for any deadlift. But as you can see, I'm trying to just naturally stop in that position. Not trying to do anything too crazy or anything like that. And then for the single leg variation, again, same thing. Notice how I'm not trying to extend or overextend my hips, which is going to cause me to get into basically that like really like that lumbar extension, which again, we don't want to be in for it. So here's some more hip lift variations. These are shoulder elevated hip lifts. So essentially this is where I would start someone before even doing thrusters. Thrusters would be the, if we want to call it 2-leg hip lifts with your shoulders elevated, would be a progression 1. Single leg would be the second progression, and then hip thruster would be the third progression. So this is something that you can do on your couch, on a bench, really anywhere that gets your shoulders elevated. The big thing that you want to do is actually start at the top when you do this, because if you can see in the bottom video, your shins should be parallel to the ground when you're at the top. So I tell everyone, start at the top, see where you're at, and then start from that position, because you want your butt almost to touch. Oops, sorry about that. When you do it. And you'll see my butt's getting pretty close to the ground. And that's a pretty high bench. Like if you've been to Southern Saratoga YMCA, like or any of the other YMCAs, the benches are pretty high. So don't worry about getting too close, but you want to be able to feel it and feel your hamstrings contract and get tight as you're doing it at the bottom. And then here's the single leg variation. So same thing, I would tell someone start at the top. As you can see, when I'm at the top, I have a nice perpendicular shin angle to the ground. I keep saying parallel, I apologize. And again, I could probably do a little bit better on my core engagement. As you can see, my back's flexed a little bit. So you want to make sure your core is tight for this. And this is the way I would progress it, is to basically start hip bridging and hip lifting until you can do like until you get to your single leg variations. Once you can do a single leg with both of those and do it for like 12 reps for 3 sets and like get up to like 30 seconds on each leg, maybe not even 30 seconds, I'd say 25 seconds each leg. Then what I would do is I would go to the shoulder elevated variation and then go to reverse lunges with that. And then go to hip thruster and go to like a single leg or a double leg Romanian deadlift and just get like a lot of like hinging underneath your belt, because a lot of times people have trouble with this. I find actually men have a much tougher time learning the hip hinge if they've never done it before than women. I've taught a lot of my female clients how to hip hinge and how to do the deadlift in about like 8 to 12 weeks. For some men, it's taken me, God, 3 months to really get them in a good position. And I've had to like try different variations in different ways to doing it until something clicked with them. And then once I got them to click and feel it, that's when you know. Because the biggest thing for this is knowing how this is supposed to feel. And then once you can really recognize that feeling, like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be engaging when I'm doing this, then you can kind of transfer it to everything else. Because if you didn't take away from this, like the cueing is very similar. It's just very slight, different cueing for each variation of this. But like the core cueing is really drive your feet through the ground at the bottom and squeeze your butt as hard as you can. So normally this is where we'd have the Q&A, but because this is recorded, I wanted to put my email out there. If you have any questions about deadlifting, if you'd like to go over deadlifting form, please feel free to reach out to me. I would be more than happy to do like a single personal training session with you and take 30 minutes to go over your deadlifting technique or a hip hinging technique. If you want to just ask questions about variations, I'd be more than happy to help you. I would even do like a virtual session with you to see where your deadlifting's at. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you for watching the presentation. Again, I apologize this wasn't live. This would have been a much better live one, but I wanted to give you guys something because I did feel bad for the technical error. So hopefully you took this away and took something away from this and go try some of those variations if you haven't done it before.